24. Catchpole, already there when Dixon arrived, turned out to be a tall, thin young man in his early 20s who looked like an intellectual trying to pass himself off as a bank clerk. He got Dixon a drink, apologized to him for taking up his time, and after a few more preliminaries said, "I think the best thing I can do is give you the true facts of this business. Do you agree with this? Or do you agree with that?" "Yes, all right, but what guarantee have I got that they are true facts?" "None, of course, except that if you know Margaret, you can't fail to recognize their plausibility. And before I start, by the way, would you mind enlarging a little on what you said over the phone about her present state of health?" Dixon did this, managing to hit as he talked about how matters stood between himself and Margaret. Catchpole listened in silence with his eyes on the table, frowning slightly and playing with a couple of dead matches. His hair was long and untidy at the end. He said, "Thanks very much. That clears things up quite a bit. I'll give you my side of the story now. Firstly, contrary to what Margaret seems to have told you, she and I were never lovers in either the emotional or what I might call the technical sense. That's news to you, I take it." "Yes," Dixon said. He felt curiously frying, as if Catchpole were trying to pick a quarrel with him. "I thought it might be. Well, having met her at a political function, I found myself, without quite knowing how, going about with her, taking her to the theater and to concerts and all that kind of thing. Quite soon I realized that she was one of these people, they're usually women, who feed on emotional tension. We began to have rows about nothing, and I mean that quite literally. I was much too wary, of course, to start any kind of sexual relationship with her, but she soon started behaving as if I had. I was perpetually being accused of hurting her, ignoring her, trying to humiliate her in front of other women and all that kind of thing. Have you had any experiences of that sort with her?" "Yes, Dixon, go on." "I can see that you and I have more in common than we thought at first. However, after particularly senseless row about some remark I made when introducing her to my sister, I decided I didn't want any more of that kind of thing. I told her so. There was a most shattering scene. Catchpole combed his hair back with his fingers and shifted in his seat. I got the afternoon off, and we were out shopping, I remember, and she started shouting at me in the street. It was really dreadful. I felt like I couldn't stand another minute of it. So finally, to keep her quiet, I agreed to go around and see her that evening about 10 o'clock. When the time came, I couldn't face going. A couple of days later, when I found out about her attempted suicide, I realized that was the very evening I'd been supposed to go and see her. It gave me a bit of shock when I realized I could have prevented the whole thing if I'd taken the trouble to put in an appearance. "Wait a minute," Dixon said with a dry mouth. "She asked me to go around that evening as well. She told me afterwards that you'd come and told her." Catchpole brushed this aside. "Are you quite sure? Are you sure it was that evening?" "Absolutely. I can remember the whole thing quite clearly. As a matter of fact, we'd just been buying the sleeping pills when she asked me to come around. The ones she must have used in the evening. That's how I remember." "Why? That's up. Why? What's up?" "She bought some sleeping pills while she was with you?" "Yes, that's right." "When was this?" "That she bought them? Oh, about midday, I suppose." "Why?" Catchpole said slowly. "But she bought a bottle of pills while she was with me in the afternoon." They looked at each other in silence. "I imagine she forged the prescription," Dixon said finally. "We were both supposed to be there then and see what we'd driven her to." Catchpole said bitterly, "I knew she was neurotic, but not as neurotic as that. It was lucky for her the chap in the room underneath came up to complain about her wireless. She wouldn't have taken a risk like that. No, this pretty well confirms what I've always thought. Margaret had no intention of committing suicide then or at any other time. She must have taken some of the pills before we were due to arrive. Not enough to kill her, of course, and waited for us to rush in and wring our hands and to see her approach ourselves. I don't think there can be any doubt of that. She was never in any danger of dying at all. But there's no proof of that," Dixon said. "You're just assuming that. Don't you think I'm right, knowing what you must know about her?" "I don't know what to think, honestly. But can't you see? Isn't it logical enough for you? It's only the explanation that fits. Look, try to remember. Did she say anything about how many pills she took, what the fatal dose was, anything like that?" "No, I don't think so. I just remember her saying she was holding on to an empty bottle all the time." She said, she was I just remember her saying she was holding on to the empty bottle all the time. The empty bottle, there were two bottles, that's it. I'm satisfied now. I was right." "Have another drink," Dixon said. He felt he must get away from Catchpole for a moment. While he was standing at the bar, he found he couldn't think. All he could do was try to vainly to get his thoughts into order. He hadn't yet recovered from the ordinary basic surprise at finding that a stranger knew very well someone he knew very well. One intimacy he felt ought to rule out any others. And as for Catchpole's theory, he couldn't believe it. Could he believe it? It didn't seem the kind of theory to which believe or disbelieve could be attached. As soon as he'd rejoined him with drinks, Catchpole said, "You're not still unconvinced, I hope." He swayed about it in his chair with a kind of unstable exaltation. "The empty bottle, but there were two bottles, and she only used one. How do I know? Do you imagine she'd have failed to tell you she'd used two if she had used two? No, she forgot to tell you a lie there. She thought it wouldn't matter. She couldn't predict my getting hold of you in this fashion. I can't blame her for that. Even the best planner can't think of everything. She had checked up, of course, and she'd been in no danger with one bottle. Perhaps two bottles wouldn't have killed her either, but she wasn't taking any risk." He picked up his drink and put half of it down. "Well, I'm extremely grateful to you for doing this for me. I'm completely free of her now. No more worrying about how she is, thank God. That's worth a great deal." He gazed at Dixon with his hair falling over his brow. "And you're free from her too, I hope. You didn't ever mention the question of marriage to her, did you? I wasn't fool enough for that. She told you I did, I suppose, yes. And you didn't go off to Wales with the girl around the time either. Unfortunately not. I went to Wales, yes, but that was for my firm. They don't provide the representatives of girls to go away with, the more is the pity. He finished his drink and stood up, his manner quieting. I hope I've removed your suspicions of me. I've been very glad to meet you, and I'd like to thank you for what you've done. He leaned over forward to Dixon and lowered his voice further. Don't try to help her anymore. It's too dangerous for you. I know what I'm talking about. She doesn't need any help either, really. The best of luck to you. Goodbye. They shook hands and Catchpole strode out, his tie flapping. Dixon finished his drink and left. A couple of minutes later, he strolled back to the digs through the lunchtime crowds. All the facts seemed to fit, but Margaret had fixed herself too firmly in his life and his emotions to be pushed out of them by a mere recital of facts. Failing some other purgative agent than facts, he could foresee himself coming to disbelieve this lot altogether. Miss Culler provided lunch for those who asked for it at 1 o'clock. He planned to take advantage of this and catch a train home just after 2. Entering the dining room, he encountered Bill Atkinson sitting at the table reading a new number of the wrestling periodical to which he subscribed. He looked up at Dixon and, as sometimes happened, addressed a remark to him. Just had your popsy threw on the blower, he said. Oh, God, what did she want? Don't say, oh, God, he frowned threateningly. I don't mean the one that gets me down, the one that always chucking dummies. I mean the other one, the one you say belongs to the bearded sportsman, Christine. Yes, Christine, Atkinson said, contriving to make the name sound like a term of abuse. What does she want, Bill? This might be important. Atkinson turned to the front page of his journal. There were 2 lacunes who were interlocked. He indicated that the conversation was still in existence by saying, wait a minute. After reading attentively something he'd written in the margin, he added in a wounding tone, I didn't get all of it, but the main thing is the train goes at 1:50. What, today? I heard she wasn't going for a few days yet. I can't help what you heard. I'm telling you what I heard. She said she had some news for you that she couldn't tell me over the old phone, and that if you wanted to see her again, you could see her off on this 1:50 caper. It was up to you, she said. She seemed a bit set on the idea that it was up to you, but don't ask me what she meant by it because she didn't let on. She just said she'd understand if you didn't come. Don't ask me to translate that either. He added that the train referred to was leaving not from the main city station, but from the smaller one near Welch's house. Some trains not originating from the city stop at the station on their way towards London. I better get moving then, Dixon said, making calculations. You had. I'll tell the bag you won't be wanting your lunch. Go and get on that bus. Atkins lowered his face towards his paper. Dixon ran out into the street. He felt as if he'd been hurrying all his life. Why wasn't she getting a train from the city station? There was an excellent one to London at 3:20, he knew. What was her news? At any rate, he had some for her, 2 lots, in fact. Did her unexpected departure mean that she and Bertrand had another row? A bus was due to turn up College Road between 1:10 and 1:15, and was that now. The next was at 1:35 or so. Hopeless. He ran faster. No, she wouldn't have left just because of a row. He'd stake anything on her not being the type of take a revenge of that sort for a thing of that sort. Oh, hell. Her news was probably just that Uncle Julius was going to offer him a job. She wouldn't have counted on his saving her so quickly. She wouldn't have counted on him having heard so quickly. Would she have asked him to come all this way just to tell him that? Or was it all just an excuse for seeing him again? Why should she want to do that? He suddenly bounded aside into the road. But why would she want to do that? He suddenly bounded aside into the road where some yards away a large taxi-like car was waiting in a side street to insert itself in the further stream of traffic. Dixon cut through the nearest stream, bawling, taxi, taxi. Just what he wanted in a moment he was able to make for the far pavement, but the taxi simultaneously drove out into the main road and began to gather speed away from him. Taxi, taxi. It was nearly then when the face of the principal's wife, wearing a hat like a beretta, appeared at the back window, frowning at him from what had looked like an empty rear compartment. The taxi was clearly not a taxi, but the principal's car. Was the principal in it too? Dixon veered away through an open gate into someone's front garden where he knelt for a moment behind the hedge. Was it really so important for him to meet Christine at the station? Wouldn't he be able to get in touch with her afterwards through Uncle Julius? Had he still got the piece of paper with her phone number on it? A rapping on glass made him turn around. An old lady and a big parrot were glaring at him from a ground floor window. He bowed deeply, then remembered his bus and ran out onto the pavement. A couple of 100 yards away, a bus was coming slowly up the hill from the city. It was too far off for him to be able to read his destination screen. In any case, his exertions had misted his glasses over. But it must be the one and he must get it. He sensed, as far as he could sense anything at that moment, that something would go badly wrong if he failed to turn up at the station, that something he wanted would be withdrawn. He began running even faster so that people began to skip out of his way and look at him with wondering resentment. The bus, unable for the moment to begin in its turn into College Road, was halted in mid-traffic and he could now see his bus. He ran steadily towards the corner of College Road, but the bus began moving again and reached it before him. When he next saw the bus, it was halted about 50 yards away up College Road, and someone had just got on. Dixon broke into a frenzied lung-igniting sprint while the conductor watched him immobile from the platform. When he was halfway to the bus, this official rang the bell. The driver let in the clutch and the wheels began to turn. Dixon found he was even better at running than he thought, but when the gap between man and bus had narrowed to perhaps 5 yards, it began to widen rapidly. Dixon stopped running in favor of the conductor, who was still watching unemotionally with the best known obscene gesture. At once, the conductor rang the bell again and the bus stopped abruptly. Dixon hesitated for a moment, then trotted lightly up to the bus and boarded with some diffidence. He found himself unwilling to meet the eye of the conductor, who now said admirably, "Well run, Whacker," rang the bell for the third time. Dixon gasped out a question about the bus's time of arrival at the station, which is where it terminated its run. Got a civil but evasive answer, spent a few moments beating down the stairs of the nearby passengers and climbed effortlessly to the top deck. There he made his rebounding way to the front seat and collapsed into it without being able to afford the breath to groan. He began swallowing the thick burning substance that filled his mouth and throat, panted energetically for a time, and tremulously took out his jacket of small cigarettes and his matches. After reading the joke on the back of the matchbox a few times and laughing at it, he lit a cigarette. This was the only action he could take for the moment. He looked out of the window. The road unfolded itself in front of him, and he couldn't help feeling some sort of exhilaration, especially at the brightness of the landscape under the sun. Beyond the lines of green, tiled, semi-detached villas, open fields were already appearing, and through some trees he could see a gleam of water. Christina said that she'd understand if he failed to turn up to see her. What did that mean? Did it mean that she understood that his commitments with Margaret would have decided him not to come? Or had it some vaguely unwelcome overtone, implying that she'd understand that the whole thing between them now appeared to him as a romantic mistake? Margaret or no Margaret, he couldn't allow Christina to escape him today. If she did, he might not see her again at all. Not at all. That was a disagreeable phrase. Suddenly his face altered, seeming to become all nose and glasses. The bus had moved up behind a lorry, slowly drawing along an elaborate trailer which had a notice on it recommending caution and saying how many feet long it was. A smaller notice adduced further grounds for caution in the elliptic form. Air brakes. Lorry, trailer, and bus began moving at a steady 12 miles an hour round what gave firm promise of being a long series of bends. With difficulty, Dixon snatched his gaze from the back of the trailer and, to fortify himself, began thinking about what Catchpole had said to him about Margaret. He realized at once that his mind had been made up as soon as he decided to make this journey. For the first time, he really felt that it was no use trying to save those who fundamentally would rather not be saved. To go on trying would not merely be to yield to pity and sentimentality, but wrong, and to pursue it to its conclusion inhumane. It was all very bad luck on Margaret, and probably derived, as he thought before, from the anterior bad luck of being sexually unattractive. Christine's more normal, i.e. less unworkable character no doubt resulted, in part at any rate, from having been lucky with her face and figure, but that was simply that. To write things down as luck wasn't the same as writing them off as non-existent or in some way beneath consideration. Christine was still nicer and prettier than Margaret, and all the deductions that could be drawn from that fact should be drawn. There was no end to the ways in which nice things are nicer than nasty ones. Had been luck, too, that had freed him from pity's adhesive plaster. If Catchpole had been a different sort of man, he, Dixon, would still be wrapped up as firmly as ever, and now he badly needed another dose of luck. If it came, he might yet prove to be of use to somebody. The conductor now appeared and negotiated with Dixon about his ticket. When this was over, he said, 1:43 were due at the station. I looked it up. Oh, shall we be on time, do you think? Couldn't say I'm sorry, not if we keep crawling behind this raft contraption. We shan't. I shouldn't think. Train to catch? Well, I want to see someone who's getting the 150. Shouldn't have built on it if I were you. He lingered, no doubt, to examine Dixon's black eye. Thanks, Dixon said dismissively. They entered a long stretch of straight road with a slight dip in the middle so that every yard of its empty surface was visible. Far ahead, an emaciated brown hand appeared from the lorry's cab and made a writhing, beckoning movement. The driver of the bus ignored this invitation in favor of drawing to a gradual halt by a bus stop outside a row of the thatched cottages. The foreshortened bulks of two old women dressed in black waited until the bus was quenched of all motion before clutching each other and edging with sidelong caution out of Dixon's view towards the platform. In a moment he heard their voices crying unintelligibly to the conductor. Then activity seemed to cease. At least 5 seconds passed. Dixon stirred elaborately at his post and twisted himself about looking for anything that might have had a share in causing this caesura in his journey. He could detect nothing of this kind. Was the driver slumped in his seat, the victim of syncope, or had he suddenly got an idea for a poem? For a moment longer the pose prolonged itself, then the picture of sleepy rustic calm was modified by a fairly sudden emergence from a cottage some yards behind of a third woman in a lilac costume. She looked keenly towards the bus and identified it with any obvious difficulty, then approached with a kind of bowed shuffle that suggested the movements of a serviceman towards a pay table. This image was considerably reinforced by her hat, which resembled a guardsman's peaked cap Cap that had been strenuously run over and then died cerise. Indeed, it was possible that the old bitch, a metallic noise, came from the back of Dixon's throat when he saw her smile of self-admiration at having caught her bus, had actually found what was to become her hat lying in the road outside her nasty little cottage after military exercise, the legacy of some skylarking lout in the carrier platoon from whose head it had fallen under the tracks and wheels of an entire battalion. The bus nosed its prudential way onto the crown of the road, and the gap between it and the lorry began to diminish. Dixon found that his whole being had become centered in the matter of the bus's progress. He couldn't be bothered any longer to wonder what Christine would say if he got there in time, nor what he'd do if he didn't. He just sat there on the dusty cushions, galvanized by the pitchings of the bus and the appearance of seismic laughter, sweating stoutly in the heat and the apprehension. Thank God he hadn't been drinking, stretching his face in a fresh direction at each overtaking car, each bend, each motiveless circumspection of the driver. The bus was now resolutely secured again behind the trailer, which soon began to reduce speed even further. Before Dixon could cry out, before he had time to guess what was to happen, the lorry and the trailer had moved off to the side into a lay-by, and the bus was traveling on alone. Now was the time, he thought with reviving hope, for the driver to start making up some of the time he must have lost. The driver, however, was clearly unable to assent to his diagnosis. Dixon lit another small cigarette, jabbing with the match at the sandpaper as if it were the driver's eye. He had, of course, no idea of the time, but estimated that they must by now have covered 5 of the 8 or so miles to their destination. Just then the bus rounded a corner and slowed abruptly and stopped, making a lot of noise. A farm tractor was laboriously pulling at right angles across the road, something that looked like the springs of a giant's bed, caked in places with earth and decked with ribbon and grasses. Dixon thought he really would have to run downstairs and knife the drivers of both vehicles. What next? What next? What actually would be next? A mass holdup, a smash, floods, a burst tire, an electric storm with falling trees and meteorites, a diversion, a low-level attack by communist aircraft, sheep, the drivers stung by a hornet. He chose the last of these if consulted. Hawking's its gears, the bus crept on while every few yards tropes of old men waited to make their quivering way aboard. As the traffic thickened slightly towards the town, the driver added to his hypertrophied caution, a psychopathic devotion to the interests of other road users. The sight of anything between a removal van and a junior bicycle halved his speed to 4 miles an hour and sent his hand, Dixon guessed, flapping in a slow motion St. Vitus's dance of beckonings and wavings. Learners practiced reversing across his path. Gossiping knots of loungers parted leisurely at the touch of his reluctant bonnet. Toddlers reeled to retrieve toys from under his just revolving wheels. Dixon's head switched angrily to and fro in vain search for a clock. The inhabitants of this mental, moral, and physical backwater, devoting as they had done for years their few waking moments to the pursuit of offenses against chastity, were too poor and were also too mean. Dixon, seeing the hulk of the railway station 30 yards off, returned painfully to reality and rattled along the aisle to the stairs. Before the bus had reached the station stop, he plunged down, out, across the road, and into the booking hall. The clock over the ticket office pointed to 1:47. At once the minute hand stepped one pace onward. Dixon flung himself at the barrier. A hard-faced man confronted him. "Which platform for London, please?" The man looked at him appraisingly, as if trying to gauge in advance his fitness to hear a more than usually improper joke. "Bit earlier, aren't you, eh?" "Next to London's 8:17. 8:17? No restaurant car? What about the 150? No 150. Haven't got it mixed up with the 140 by any chance?" Dixon swallowed. "I think I must have done," he said. "Thanks. Sorry, George." Nodding mechanically, Dixon turned away. Bill Atkinson must have made a mistake in taking down Christine's message, but it wasn't like Atkinson to make mistakes of that sort. Perhaps it had been Christine who made the mistake. It didn't really matter. He walked slowly to the entrance and stood looking out from the shadows at the little sunlit square. He still had his job, and it wouldn't be very difficult to get in touch with Christine. It was only that he felt it would be too late when he did. But anyway, he met her and talked to her a few times. Thank God for that. As he watched, wondering what to do next, he caught sight of a car with a damaged wing moving uncertainly around a post office van. Something about this car held Dixon's attention and began to crawl towards him, roaring like a bulldozer. The roar was cut off by a spine-tingling snort of cogs, and the car froze in its tracks. A tallish blonde girl wearing a wine-colored costume and carrying a Macintosh and a large suitcase got out and began hurrying towards the spot where Dixon stood. Dixon skipped out of sight behind a pillar as he best could under the impact of what must surely be a legion of diaphragm. How could he, of all people, have ignored the importance of Welch's car-driving habits? The roar was cut off by a spine-tingling snort of cogs, and the car froze in its track. A tallish blonde girl. A large suitcase got out and began hurrying towards the spot where Dixon stood. Dixon skipped out of sight behind a pillar as best he could under the impact of what must surely be a lesion of the diaphragm. Okay, that's the end of chapter 24. I don't get, how could he of all people have ignored the importance of Welch's car driving habits? Okay, I'm on the last chapter now. I got like literally like less than 5 pages for the whole book. I'm just glad that the book is over. My daughter started preschool. She's only 3.5. She's barely 3.5, so I guess she's in daycare. I'll talk about it on the vlog, so I'm just thinking about it right now. I just hope she's not being mistreated by kids or something. I hope she's okay.